This is the MIT 150 Oral History Project interview with Isaac Colbert. Colbert?
I'll respond to either one,
Okay.
but Colbert's what I grew up with.
On June 18th, 2007, interview starts at 9 a.m. So maybe we could just start your background, where you grew up, what your family was like.
I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. I was born at the end of World War II. I'm one of the baby boomers, and that wave that began after the soldiers began to trickle back home or flood back home from the theaters of war. My father had actually done 2 stints in the Army. He was very patriotic, but he was injured in a Jeep accident in Belgium after the hostilities had ceased. From everything that my folks told me, his Jeep ran over a landmine, an unexploded landmine, and he was the only survivor. He and 3 of his best friends were in that Jeep, and he survived after a fashion, but he spent most of the rest of his life in hospitals. We used to visit him every week, and some of my earliest memories are of Mom taking my brother, there's just 2 of us, my brother, older brother and me, packing us up and taking us first to Walter Reed for a while, and then the Army moved him to Perryville in northern Maryland, and we used to go up there quite regularly to visit Dad, and sometimes he'd know us, sometimes he wouldn't when he could come down. Most of the time I was too young to go into the ward, so I had to sit there while everybody else went upstairs to visit Dad. So it was a rather curious weekly event for many, many years. And then my father passed away in 1959. So essentially, I was brought up by my mom, her sisters who lived lived nearby, and the kind of close-knit community that formed the kind of village that it's hard to find anymore in urban communities. But there were elderly people around, and professionals and working class people, et cetera, in the neighborhood in northwest Baltimore. And everyone took care of everyone else, really. I remember many, many times when I was doing something, when my brother and I were doing things we weren't supposed to do, some neighbor would say, "Aren't you Rosalie's boy? You wait until she comes home," and I knew what that meant. So it was an interesting neighborhood. My parents actually really grew up in Baltimore. My mother was born there. Her family of 5 girls had moved up from Pensacola, Florida in the 1920s. And they don't talk about it very much. They never talked about it very much. Clearly it was painful. And I pieced together over the years that Klan activity had something to do with the decision to move north. They settled in Baltimore. My father's family was already there. And my father and mother met in high school. And the rest is history, and I'm a part of it.
So my memory of any major events growing up?
Oh, lots of major events. I certainly remember the first TV, which was a console model TV. We were maybe the second family in the block to get a TV. My mother and her sisters put together so that we could have one. It was a little black and white picture, and there wasn't an awful lot on, but I remember a show called Western Trails, and it was a whole lot of westerns with Gene Autry and Pat Buttram and that whole group. And then at some point there were a couple of comedy shows, Milton Berle. We used to keep everybody laughing. I do remember that. But the first serious thing I remember was watching some of the McCarthy hearings on TV. I remember seeing this relentless, rather humorless guy on TV pressing people about communism. Do you know, or have you ever known anybody who was a communist? And it was just pretty upsetting. And I remember my folks were really upset with him about this. She thought this was just terribly un-American and that he was persecuting people, and he was. And I just happened to have been watching at the time when Edward R. Murrow, I used to watch Edward R. Murrow's show quite regularly, and at the time when he really called Senator McCarthy to task. I clearly remember that. And even then I knew this was something important. This was something really important, so I remember that. I remember Sputnik very well. I thought it was both cool and scary that the Russians had actually put a satellite up in space and it was beeping above our heads. But there was certainly a kind of call to intellectual and scientific arms that went out. And I benefited from that. Being in a city that was still around that time intensely segregated. Most people don't understand how segregated a city Baltimore was. I clearly remember separate drinking fountains. I clearly remember the back of the bus. I clearly remember not being able to go into what really was an awful little place called the White Coffee Pots on the way to school on a cold day because blacks couldn't go in there for many years. And it wasn't until at least the late 50s, early 60s or so before the civil rights movement brought an end to all of that, and it kind of crumbled pretty quickly. And once I did get into a white coffee pot and tasted that awful sludge that they call coffee, you know, it was one of those be careful what you wish for kind of things. But but the point wasn't how good the coffee was. The point was that everybody had an opportunity and a right to go to any of the businesses that were there to serve the public. So I remember that, and in fact had my own little role in the civil rights movement in Baltimore too, and I found out very quickly that despite all the training, etc., I was not exactly nonviolent. When somebody came at me, I went back at them. Good old urban survival came to the fore, and after that I supported the movement from behind the scenes and not on the front line, so it was really interesting.
How did you get into in high school? What was your high school like?
Oh, I went to, I should say first that the elementary and junior high schools I went to were neighborhood schools, and therefore they were all black schools. And the education and preparation I got there was absolutely superb. One of the byproducts of the kind of segregation that we had was that a lot of teachers, superbly trained teachers, could only teach in their communities. So there were lots of teachers in junior high school, for example, who had master's degrees and doctorates. In fact, my homeroom teacher, Mr. Moore, who was a big influence on me, spoke many languages. He spoke French, German, Spanish, Latin fluently, and Greek fluently. And he taught all those languages, and I just thought he was an amazing human being. And he always wanted to be a college professor, but he just couldn't get the jobs. So, but he always pushed us to excel academically, to push ourselves as far as possible. And we did benefit from the national mania, really, is what happened after Sputnik went up, to develop kids with interest in science and engineering and math. And so the class that I was in, which was a pretty sharp group of 28 boys and girls, we were privy to a very special educational curriculum. And I don't remember an awful lot about it except that we were always accelerated, quote unquote. And we were tested every year. Somehow or the other, we knew we were getting something that others weren't getting, and so we had much advanced material. And I realized later on that by the 6th grade or so, we were being taught trigonometry, but it wasn't called that. I didn't realize what this was until really I got to high school. So I've seen all this before. I know how to do this stuff. So it was a superb preparation.
So on this accelerated program with Dr. Moore, who was so multilingual, they were products of what system?
Oh, they were products of a public education system that largely doesn't exist in this country anymore. Dedicated teachers, lifelong teachers, in classrooms that were full of stable individuals from stable families who wanted an education. There really wasn't, and maybe I'm being rosy in my recollection, but there weren't drugs in the schools. There wasn't a need to deal with mental health issues, broken families, communities in distress. There wasn't a need for the teachers to deal with this whole complex of social and psychological issues that are in the schools now, and that really are a product of a tremendous amount of social change and breakdown of traditional communities. No, the teachers could focus on education. They didn't have a whole lot of trouble keeping us in order either, because we were sent there to learn, and our parents made sure we were there to learn. And there was this compact between both spoken and unspoken between parents and teachers that if there was some trouble, the teachers would get in touch with the parents, or the parents would get in touch with the teachers, and the kid would be straightened out. So today, everything is different, and largely because they have guns. They have guns, they have drugs, they have bad images surrounding them, and there are more distractions than they were in my day. So the teachers taught, and the students tried to learn, and I found that my preparation was second to none. In Baltimore, there are two of the oldest public high schools in the country, Baltimore Polytechnic Institute and Baltimore City College. Poly had the reputation of producing the engineers. City had the reputation of producing doctors. Both were exam schools. I took the exams. I was interested in City College. It's called Baltimore City College. And I was among those who were admitted to the 10th grade class. Found out there was a 9th grade class, but the black kids didn't hear about that, so it's okay. This was the special college preparatory curriculum, and the kids in these 3 classes, these 3 homerooms, or maybe 4, were on our way to college, to good colleges, and so we were the intellectual elite of the school. And in my homeroom class, there were 6 or 7 black students. Most of the students in that school were Jewish, and those curriculums were Jewish. A lot of good friends are made out of those kids. A couple of them I still am in touch with. I found high school to be one of the first of 2 wonderful arenas. I was sort of in my element. I was well prepared, so I knew I could hold my own with any of the other well-prepared students there. I was in everything. I found that I really enjoyed student government. I really enjoyed drama because I had been involved outside in stage productions, etc. So I loved being on stage. I was in every kind of club and extracurricular activity you can name, and most of them I ended up being president of, so I was really quite something. My only challenge in high school was my homeroom teacher, who I had a running battle with the entire time, and he kind of saw me as smug and out of my place, and I saw him as a jerk. And we just had a running battle all the time. I had a sharp tongue back then and wasn't afraid to use it, and he didn't quite know how to deal with that. He wasn't quite used to having certainly a black kid talk back to him and tell him that you're not being fair and I'm not taking it. We had a shaky peace. we were out of a shaky peace. And then when I graduated at the end, I remember him telling me he was trying to be hard on me because I had to be prepared for a hard world. And I told him, 1964, class of 64. And I remember telling him that clearly I can make my way in the world, and I didn't need him to make it more difficult for me. But thank you for what you tried to do, and goodbye. And then I went on to Johns Hopkins to undergraduate school, which was 4 years of boot camp.
The reason why you chose Johns Hopkins?
Yeah, there was a
Yeah.
yeah, it was the best place around. My vision didn't extend much beyond Baltimore and Maryland. I was not a world traveler then. Family couldn't afford to travel much, and most everybody I knew was in Baltimore. And the best place to go was Johns Hopkins. And so I wasn't interested in Morgan. I wasn't interested in the University of Maryland. I wasn't interested in any of those other things. I said, I'm going to go to Johns Hopkins or I'll go into the Army. I've never forgotten my interview with the director of admissions, who looked at my I had a little CV at the time that I put together with all these things I'd done, and great grade point averages and all that kind of stuff. And he looked down there, looked at it, and complimented me on how well I had done in high school, in a tough high school, but said, I'm not certain that Johns Hopkins is prepared to accommodate Negro students. And why do you have to tell me that? Because I said to him, you're going to accommodate one, or we're going to be in court. And then he looked down at my papers again and discovered that we had the same birth date, December 7th. We got talking about Pearl Harbor and Pearl Harbor Day and all of that. The long and short of it is that I got admitted to Hopkins with a full ride. So, sometimes it's the accidents of fate that get you where you need to be. So I matriculated at Hopkins in the class of '68, and thus began a couple of years of hell. Hopkins was, I thought I was going to major in chemistry. Didn't take me very long in my freshman chemistry course to realize that they didn't like me and I didn't like them. The faculty member who was in charge, and I remember his name to this day, but I will not state it, on the first day in class just sort of came over to me and said, young man, it's going to be very difficult for you to make a good grade in my class. And I knew exactly what he meant. And I stuck that class out. I ended up making a C. That was the first C I'd ever made, and I was not happy. And I decided that I was not going to stay in a department that didn't want me. So I can switch to biology very quickly, where I was doing fine. So trudging along with the rest of the students, and in a time when everything was so intensely pre-med, with all of the cutthroat competition that entailed.
Even then?
It's much better now. It's so much better now. It was amazing to me how unscrupulous some of my fellow students were. They would razor articles out of the journals and go to the library and just razor articles out so the other students couldn't get them. They would try to change. These were days when the faculty would would publicly post exam grades on the door, and everybody was crowding around to see the exam grades, and there was always somebody looking to see who made a bad grade and would yell out the names. Oh, Feldman, you made a D, you idiot Feldman, Colbert, how did you make a B, those kinds of things. It was just abysmal. It was abysmal. But that was life then, and I slugged my way through Johns Hopkins like the rest of them. My freshman class had only 4 black students in it. 3 of us were from City College, and 1 was a young man from Grambling, Louisiana, who lived in the dorms. He didn't survive. He didn't survive his first year. He left after that. The rest of us had the benefit of going home to receptive and supportive communities. And I think it is that. On the positive side, living at home made Hopkins bearable for me. I'd commute in every day. On the negative side, living at home meant I was still with mama with all that entailed in my life. And but I got through Hopkins. Several.
First class of black students that were admitted? Or?
Oh no, we were by no means. No, there had been a few black students here and there over the decades, actually, but we had probably more in our class, in the class of '68, than ever before, and we proceeded, of course, to agitate for change, and it wasn't just the few black students who were there. I mean, the times were, civil rights was in the air, Vietnam was heating up, and people were looking down and saying this could get to be a mess. You know, even in '64, as we were sending advisors over to Vietnam, and it got to be really nasty by the time we graduated, and I'll get to that in a minute. So by '66, it was really heating up quite a lot. My goodness, I remember President Johnson helicoptering in from Washington on several occasions to give major policy addresses at Hopkins. He really liked Hopkins because Milton Eisenhower was president then. So, and they were apparently on very good terms. So there was the air of change was in the society. Civil rights was prominent. There were many voices saying that Hopkins needed to be more diverse. We didn't use that word back then, but that's what was meant. And so subsequent classes brought in more students of color. But Hopkins has never been and never become the kind of diverse institution that even at MIT is right now. It was kind of grim in that regard. So I could go back to my community and see people of color, hear affirming messages, etc. It really wasn't until the end of my sophomore year, beginning of my junior year, that things really turned around, quite by an accident, because of an accident. And that time, the government made available to college students summer employment opportunities. Had to take the civil service exam, and for those who did well, there were employment opportunities, summer employment opportunities at up to the level of GS4 in the GS system, government HR system. The GS4 was something like $4,000 a summer, and back then that was, my gosh, a fortune. Of course I took the civil service exam, did extraordinarily well. I actually thought it was a pretty silly exam, so I did extraordinarily well, and I found that I was offered and then kind of assigned to a job at a place called Edgewood Arsenal. And it turns out they had misclassified me as a psychologist. But they offered me a job at GS4 level at Edgewood Arsenal up in northern Maryland. And I sort of said, well, why not? Let's see what this is. So I went up there. It was in the experimental medicine division, the psychology branch. And there I met my first real mentor, who is a close friend. His whole family is like a second family to me. Even now. I was in a lab that was involved with chemical warfare, and we were testing chemical warfare agents in blind and double-blind experiments on animals, ranging from rats and pigeons to monkeys and apes. And in the lab, a little ways from us, they were using humans, but I wanted no parts of that. We had quite enough arguments about the ethics and morals of the work we were doing. Bill would pick me up. Bill Wagman was the head of that lab. And he would pick me up from the house in the morning, and we'd drive out there arguing all the way about the ethics of what we were doing. And it was a lot of fun. And in that lab, I got my introduction to computers and digital logic circuitry. I did my first real experiments, actually on my own. I won an award for the summer research that I'd done, got a publication out of it, which was promptly labeled top secret, so I've never been able to get it even since then. And I was invited to come back the next summer. Outside of that program, they wanted to classify me as a psychologist, GS5, and bring me back the next summer, which was wonderful. And what it did with the lab wrapping itself around me that way was convince me to change my major. So I went back to Hopkins and talked to the dean about changing my major at such a late date, which required taking a huge overload. And I think the dean was more than happy to let me do that, because I think he thought I was going to fall flat on my face. But what I did was then enter this department, the psychology department, and found a home. The faculty there, for the first time in my experience at Hopkins, the faculty was happy to see me. And the faculty members were absolutely welcoming and delightful, and in fact, kind of conspiratorial about my social education. They would take me over to the faculty club, and we'd have some real fun experiences with this black kid coming in the faculty club with faculty and sitting in one of the big high chairs, and saying, I'm with them. Instead of serving them, I'm with them. They told me a lot about the field. They started interesting me in, as I look back, I got my first real interest in organizational behavior because of them. That wasn't what I majored in, but they told me a lot about the politics and inner workings of academia and the departments, and I was fascinated.
Organizational, experimental, social?
They were experimental psychologists. There was a little everything there, but mostly experimental psychologists, social psychologists were there. And I happened to walk into one of the faculty members' offices. He was doing these wonderful experiments with rats and their licking behavior. And he had invented a device called a lickometer, which can, rats lick it. When rats lick, their tongues are very fast. And you can actually condition that. So anyway, he invented a device to measure that. It was called a lickometer. And it was carefully controlled with lots of electronics at the time, so I thought, this is neat. And I said, I want to work for you. Can I be in your lab? Can I do something for you? And he looked at me and he said, come on downstairs, let's see what you can do. And we went down to the basement where a couple of his graduate students were at a piece of equipment hooking up digital logic circuits from behind. And I looked at that and said, I know how to do that. I've been doing that for a couple of summers, and pitched right in with it. And who is this kid? Where's the kid come from, and really made a bunch of friends right away. So I became one of the darlings of the department. And both they and Bill Wagman at Edgewood Arsenal were saying, you're going to graduate school. Kid, you're going to graduate school. And I'm sort of saying, well, why? I can go to work. I can go to work. You're going to graduate school. And they decided where I was going to go. And I was going to go to Brown. Since I was in experimental psychology, it was, at that time, the #2 ranked department in the country. And experimental psychology, the #1 rank was out somewhere Boulder doing things that I was interested in, and I wasn't interested in going across country. So they sent me to Brown. They wrote these wonderful recommendations, and I'd done extraordinarily well in the department. And I was admitted to Brown's graduate school, which started another chapter in my life, because I didn't even know where Brown was at the time. You know, they said, we're sending you to Brown. And my reaction was, what is that, some little black college out in the middle of nowhere, you know? And I remember Jim Deese, Professor Deese, sort of saying, you've never heard of the Ivy League colleges? And I said, yeah, Harvard and Yale and Princeton, yeah. I said, well, Brown is one of the Ivy League schools. You little fool, it's up in Providence. You know, I said, where's Providence? You know, where's Providence? You know, so I went and looked up Providence, and so I was in Rhode Island, you know, the littlest state in the Union. And you're sending me up there? You know, okay, all right. So I actually arrived in graduate school sight unseen. I had not gone to visit before, but they had sort of sent forth the word, you got to take this kid. And I arrived in Providence in the summer of 1968, and found wealth that I had never seen before. You know, my gosh, I've never seen so many Maseratis and Lamborghinis and Porsches, et cetera. And this is what the undergraduates had, you know, and these, in a place with these big old Victorian houses of a sort that I'd never seen before. You know, there are very few places like that in Baltimore. And I sort of, and this city that was different than anything I'd ever imagined before. And I, first of all, I instantly fell in love with Victorian houses. Just thought, oh my gosh, these are beautiful. These are absolutely beautiful. And saw what real wealth was like with some of these students who were at Brown. And then walked into my department, the Walter Hunter Laboratory. Walter Hunter was one of the great psychologists at Brown. The lab was named after him. And I walked into my future advisor's office, Alan Schreier, who was standing with his back to the door, and he was looking out of the window of his office. And I kind of walked in and could have cleared my throat and said, Dr. Schreier, and he turned around and looked at me and said, may I help you? With a little suspicion in his voice. And I said, you're Dr. Schreier. And he looked at me and said, yes, may I help you? And I said, I'm Isaac. You know, I'm your new student, Isaac Colbert. And his eyebrow just shot right up. His eyebrow shot right up. I've never forgotten this moment. And then he caught himself and said, oh, I didn't know. And I said, you didn't know that I'm black, did you? And said, well, it doesn't make any difference. Doesn't make any difference. And you know, just the revelation that nobody in any of my recommendations had said anything about my race, and nobody in the department knew that they just admitted a black student. So you know, there was all of this jiving for a week or so, where the department head. Everybody realizes now they've got an African American student. Oh my gosh. And the department head wants to give me a personal tour of the lab, and he's walking me around, introducing me to people. And then he walks me down the main staircase of the department. And it's one of these grand staircases, and it goes up in either side. And in the middle of this grand staircase on the wall ahead is this large picture of the founder of the lab, Walter Hunter. And he had his arm around my shoulder, and Jake said to me, you know, this is Walter Hunter, the founder of the lab, and I have to tell you, he was no great lover of your people, and he's probably turning over in his grave right now, the fact that you're here. And I'm sort of wondering, why is he telling me this? So what I thought to say at that time was, well, that's good, Dr. Kling, because I'll make sure I walk by the old bastard's picture every day. And it was sort of, so he realized he'd said something really bad to me. And I just said, it's okay, that's all right. However, that was the only sour note in 4 years of joy. And I just proceeded to have a wonderful time in graduate school. Once again, you know, there were 10 of us in my entering group. We all got along together pretty well. It was clear that I was at least as well prepared, if not better prepared than the other students. So very quickly I established that I knew my stuff. And that calmed things down really quickly. And plus, I'm a bridge builder, so it wasn't long before, I got to know every faculty member and chatting, what do you do? And found things of interest with lots of people. So it wasn't long before I was pretty well known and accepted in the department. And I had a wonderful time in grad school. And it's that experience that influenced my vision for what graduate school here ought to be like, and the kinds of experiences that our graduate students ought to have. Our faculty told us two things at the very beginning. You're not competing against one another. We brought you here with the expectation that each one of you will complete your degree. And two, we expect you to work hard, but we also expect you to have lives. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure you have a life. I thought, hey, great. So our interaction with faculty was very cordial.
Did you have an idea that you weren't supposed to have a work-life balance, or that graduate school meant giving up and making those sacrifices?
At Hopkins, from seeing people at Hopkins, yes, because they were just total workaholics. They were like robots, actually. The intensity was just not to be believed. And I sort of thought, is this going to be my life? I don't know. That's why I'm not going into medicine. So, and in fact, the psychology curriculum as an undergraduate, if you really wanted to go into psychiatry, was extremely easy. We had some wonderful people, and in fact, everybody back then did a psychiatry rotation, sort of, we call it rotation of psychology classes. We did the anatomy and physiology classes, the cadavers, and all that entailed, people passing out all over the place and throwing up all over the place. It was kind of fun, actually. But I knew I didn't want to go into medicine, because as I looked at the way those people worked and conducted their lives, that didn't seem like what I wanted. So I went off to graduate school, and this was what we were told basically at the beginning: you're going to have lives. And I thought that's the way graduate school is going to be. That's the way it should be. And I had no other examples to counter that. So we had a great faculty come down to the room where many of the graduate students had offices. It was a big circular place called the Circus. And they'd come down and they'd put a table tennis set up in the middle, and they'd come down and play ping pong with us and take us out, say, what are you doing? We're going down to the bar and have beer. So they taught us how to drink. And they wanted to know what was troubling us. A couple of faculty members in particular were just very close to the grad students, and they wanted to know, what our issues were. And there were times when we'd be invited to a faculty member's home for dinner, and one of the rules was no shop. No shop. So we worked very hard. We really pushed hard. We had to write lots of papers and give lots of presentations. Seemed like every month there was a defense of something or the other. So, or a presentation after which we were grilled thoroughly to see how well we knew stuff. So we were well prepared. And I left.
Spring '69, right?
That's right. And I do remember the astronauts landing on the moon.
Tell me a little bit how what campus was like. Great.
Yeah, that was a time of great change. When I arrived at Brown, there were 7 other black graduate students in the whole university, and about 26 undergraduates, most of whom were young women up at Pembroke, and this was before Brown had formally merged with Pembroke. They were talking about it. All of us embarked on recruitment. We were pretty militant at that time, because that was the big afro kind of days, lighting matches kind of days. You know, we realized that with the war heating up, well, actually the war had really heated up by then. There was a whole draft issue that I haven't talked about, but I did get to graduate school despite the several attempts of my draft board and local draft board to send me to Vietnam as cannon fodder. I had seven visits to the recruitment center. 7. Really trying hard, and it was Edgewood Arsenal that really worked it for me to make sure that I didn't get drafted. They said if I had gotten drafted, they would have made sure I got to Knoxville to do chemical warfare research rather than to Vietnam, but I wasn't having any of it. I wanted to go to graduate school. So anyway, the long and short is I got to graduate school. But when I got there were once again very few people of color. We all got together and we decided we needed to do the recruitment and we needed to make the administration pay attention and give us resources to do it. So there was the usual storming into the president's office, storming into the provost's office, in the dean's offices, acting militant and saying, this university needs to do something and we're going to do the recruiting and you're going to pay for it and blah, blah, blah. And sure, okay, okay. So we spent lots of time. Actually, when I look back on it, it's not clear how we ever got our work done because we were off recruiting. It took great effect. The next year, those numbers tripled, and then they continued to grow. And even in the department, even in the psychology department, the undergraduates and I and the other black graduate student, Warlin Gator, we did a march on the department to say that the department should be able to find a faculty member of color. And we helped recruit a faculty member of color who was part-time in that department and in medical. So we did all that and still got our stuff done. I look back very, very fondly on those years in graduate school. The campus is one of the most beautiful campuses in the country, I think, especially in spring. To see Brown's campus is amazing. It was a very liberal place. In fact, I can remember the undergraduate curriculum where there were no majors, everybody's sort of taking whatever they want to take, and I chalked it up to all these rich kids, Buffy and Muffy coming to campus, coming to college, and there were some bright kids, but they knew that the trust funds were there, lots of them, but nonetheless, nice people. There was a lot of turmoil around the war, opposition to the war. There were marches. There were civil rights marches, and the black students were demanding rights and equality and attention, et cetera, and all of that was swirling around us at the time. Social change was in the air, free love, pot, experimentation with psychoactive drugs. I mean, all that, it was being young at a time when everything was changing, and it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. I do remember an occasion in which it was very clear that two people who sort of insinuated themselves into our group had to have been federal agents. They were a little older than us. There was a black woman and a white man, and they were supposedly together. And they wanted to know everybody, all kinds of stuff. And we kind of thought these two are a little funny, And as we started to freeze them out, they just sort of disappeared. But we all realized in retrospect, they were agents. They were seeing who was who in this group. I've never forgotten those two because they were just so much older than the rest of us trying to pretend to be students, Oh well, but there was a lot of suspicion in the air in those days.
Did you live with anyone at Brown? Did you have a roommate? Or
yeah, as a matter of fact, the first year, I went there in '68, Brown had just opened a new graduate center, and that cohort of students was the first to live in the graduate center. It was a horrible building, just the most abysmal construction. You could hear, this was like a 7-story, 8-story building. You could just hear everything going on in that building all the time. The walls were thin as crepe paper. It was just a terrible place. And after that, I and a good friend, Chet Lupton, and was one of my contemporaries in the department, and Jim, gosh, I got Jim's last name now. But anyway, one of the other graduate students decided we'd move off campus and get our own apartment. So we moved off campus and got a fantastic apartment nearby and roomed together for a while. And then Jim met his girlfriend, who eventually became his wife, and then they wanted to move off. And I found this wonderful legacy apartment in one of the named houses on the hill. It was this lovely old woman who was a real character. She was in her 80s at the time. She drove a green Nash Rambler and could wheel that thing around on 2 wheels up and down the hill. She drove like a mad woman, never got into an accident. And she passed that apartment on to me, as it was recommended. And the only thing that she required of where was in that apartment was that you had to once a month have tea with her and her friends. And this is what really began sort of a formal education in gracious living. Was having tea with this wonderful group of old women who just were the most delightful and sometimes delightfully foul-mouthed people with some of the dirtiest jokes. And these were society women, and I had a ball with them. And of course there was no tea to be seen anywhere. It was all cocktails and sherry and stuff. And I just found myself looking forward to that every month. They'd go up and have conversation and a few drinks with this lovely bunch of old women who were just so much fun to be around. And of course they had a young man who was giving them attention, So it was mutually beneficial. But through them, I kind of met some other people of means who would invite me to dinners, or invite me to places where there were these table settings, like out of a magazine. Now, when I was a kid, we had a fork and a knife and a jelly jar for glass. We were doing fine. But, here's a glittering table with 4 or 5 forks and knives and glasses and stuff all over the place. And it was in those settings that I learned about really about how to live well, which fork to use, which glass to use, how to go to a cocktail party, engage in small talk, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful. Most of the time I ended up being the only person of color there, but I got by that pretty quickly, pretty quickly. It was odd a few times, particularly in some of those places down around Darien and Fairfield, Connecticut, where everyone talked with their teeth clenched. But I learned to really enjoy it, and found out it was pretty easy to meet people if I met them halfway, and had a great deal of fun and learned about foods and wines and things that I'd never had any opportunity to experience as a kid.
Did that sort of launch your interest in cooking?
Launched my interest in cooking at a very high level. Really launched my interest in food at a very high level. And I remember saying to my mom that, I'd really like, my mom was actually a good cook, and her sisters were excellent cooks. I said, I really should learn something about cooking. So she sent me a Fannie Farmer cookbook and said, you go through this and you'll know the basics, and the rest is up to you. And that's what I did. I went through that book and started learning the basics of how to cook. And then along came Julia Child, who just changed my entire perspective on food. um, this sort of wacky giant of a woman who could just do the most amazing things with food. And that really took it to another level, and I got really serious about cooking. And to this day, I still love to play with food. And wine, I love wines too. So. But it was a combination of that group and the group of people who were introducing me to a lifestyle that I'd only sort of read about and seen glimpses of in movies, movies, etc. And there I was in it, and realizing that with this high level of food that was being brought out, hey, I can do that. I can do this, and began to cook, which opened up even new social avenues.
So after you graduated, did you take any time off?
No. In fact, if there's one mistake I made was to leave graduate school without having finished writing my dissertation. It was about 2/3 written, and then I ran into a glitch which ultimately turned out to have been a programming error that it took months to find. A simple -1 where there should have been a +1 buried in an equation. It took months and months to find this. But I had been offered a job at Northeastern on the faculty, and I was really under some pressure from the department to take it, so that was the job. That was the job of the year for everybody. So, and I thought maybe I ought to stay and finish this thing and then go, but everybody kept saying this was it will only take you a couple of months to finish up. Well, no. Once I got to Northeastern and found it was on a quarter system, and I was teaching. Quickly became a teaching drone. 4 courses a quarter. No graduate assistance whatsoever. An imperative to start up a research lab, and oh, by the way, finish up that dissertation. The dissertation quickly dropped into the background, and it wasn't until spring of 73, it was fall of 72, I left. Spring of 73, I realized I need to get this thing done. So I remember taking a rowboat out. I lived in Canton at the time, and I took a little rowboat out to the middle of this little lake and dropped the anchor there, and I sat there and forced myself to finish writing my dissertation. And I got to Brown with my completed dissertation to hand in 5 minutes after the office closed. It was in May of 73, and they wouldn't open that door for anybody. I ended up having to wait another year. This really ticked me off. There were people in that office, they would not open that door. But anyway, so formally I finished in 74, but everybody who was involved knew that I finished in 73 and should have finished in 72. But by that time I was teaching. So I never went to my graduation. In fact, I was in the middle of a lecture, and I kind of looked up and said to my class, oh, yeah, I think Brown is having its commencement, and I'm formally being given my diploma today, and the crowd applauded, and I just went back to my lecture. And a few years later, I had them send it. So that was a mistake, not to do that, not to go to that. It was a mistake to leave before actually absolutely finishing everything. It was a mistake not to go to my commencement because I never got that closure. And it was a mistake to take that job at Northeastern because it was not a good place for me. Huge, too many students in the class, no support for junior faculty whatsoever. I found out that they really weren't interested in my field, which by the time had become cognitive psychology, and that the people of interest, the people doing stuff that I was interested in, were here at MIT in the psychology department. So I wandered across the river one day. I just got really frustrated because I couldn't talk to this bunch of rat and pigeon runners in my department. So I wandered across the river and looked up Molly Potter in the psychology department. They're in building E10. The building doesn't exist anymore. They're building the annex or the new part of the Wiesner building, the new building there. But the little psych department was there. And I wandered into her office and introduced myself. She had no idea who I was, you know. I remember her telling me, well, I have about a half an hour. 3 hours later, we were still sitting there talking. We worked out some joint research with a graduate student named Barbara Ertel, and really saved my sanity. I was absolutely going bananas over at Northeastern, feeling I'd made all the wrong decisions. I was in the wrong place. I don't want my career to go like this. I'm not going to stay at this place for tenure. I don't like these people. on and on and on and on. And,
did you ever have the thought to return back to Baltimore?
oh, they wanted me to come back. Hopkins, I have to give the Hopkins faculty due credit. They've been watching my career, watching me silently, and they said, come back. We'd love to have you on the faculty. They had me come down and give a seminar and gave this wonderful party afterwards. Just an amazing party afterwards. The only problem was my folks live a stone's throw from campus. And I love my family, but they're overwhelming. And there was no way I was going back to Baltimore to be that close. 400 miles has been just far enough. Just far enough. And those who know me well know that my mother and I are both very strong-willed people, and we struggled for for decades. So there was no way I was going back home. Even though to this day, I appreciate the effort that Hopkins made to try to get me to come back. Instead, I came here. And I came here actually not to do research, as I thought I was going to do. I came here to do a consulting job. So there was this opportunity to to be senior consultant and trainer in the Office of Personnel Development. It's now called OED, Office of Employee Development, but it was called Office of Personnel Development, OPD then. And I thought, well, this would be a nice opportunity to sort of figure out what I really want to do with myself. Maybe go back to Hopkins, maybe go on somewhere else, but spend a couple of years doing this, have MIT on my resume, it'll look good. They'll spit me out in a couple of years, you know, because it's a tough place.
What had you heard about MIT before you come here? Or what was the first
But I
thing
heard
you had heard of MIT?
nerds and geeks. I mean, everybody, those are the first two things, nerds and geeks. Intense, absolutely intense, and all focused around engineering. Those were the things I had heard. Poorly socialized individuals. You know, I heard all those things about MIT, you know, but brilliant and brilliant. Brilliant misfits all over the place. And of course, when I came here, I didn't find much of the sort. You know, of course, there's some everywhere. It was, the place was so poorly understood from outside. What I found was that I had stumbled into a place that was just right for me. It was just very clear that if you have ideas, energy, willing to work hard, willing to engage other people, try to build bridges, it's a wonderful place. Very affirming, very entrepreneurial, celebrating ideas. And I just found, wow, this is great.
This was in 1977.
77.
What was the campus? What was the atmosphere like?
It was a much smaller place. It was really a small place. Kendall Square was hardly developed. In fact, it was across from E19 now, where Legal Seafoods is now. There was an old electroplating factory there, electroplating business there. There was one restaurant up the street towards the river. It was the F&T Diner. Where I used to go in and joke, I'd like a hamburger and I'll take my cup of grease on the side, please, you know. And, but everybody was there. It was, there were fewer students at the time, certainly fewer graduate students. In fact, the balance was more towards undergraduates and graduates, and certainly the field was undergraduate. The administration was smaller and very tight, very, I use this in a good word, paternalistic, but in a good way. People cared about one another. They wanted to know who you were. You were expected to get to know people and to do it kind of independently and aggressively. So I spent much of my first year making the rounds of people, just introducing myself and saying, who are you, what do you do, how can I help you? And it was easy to get to know people that way. In the work that I did for OPD, we were mostly at Lincoln Labs doing a training program that since became known, that became called Charm School. And as much as they tried to be snide about it, it really changed that place. And along the way, doing these training programs out there, I came into contact with and worked with most of the senior officers at MIT. So they got to see me in action. I got to meet John Wynn and Jim Cullerton and Constantine Simonides and my goodness, Jerry Wiesner was president then, and Walter Rosenblith was provost, and Bill Dixon was running plant at the time, and eventually became EVP, executive vice president. But I got to know them all, and then where my offices were, I got to see them every day and interact with them every day, and thought this is a fun group of people.
Where were your offices?
Let's see. When I first came here, we were in E19, but then in '79, John Wynn, who was then vice president for administration and personnel, convinced me to stay. He said, "Come work with me, and you'll get to see, you'll get to see an organization like MIT from the top down." Now that was an irresistible lure. So I went over to work with John, and his office was upstairs now, where Sue Lester and the corporation offices are, on the second floor, building 7. I went up there to work with John, and Jim Cullerton was his assistant at the time, eventually becoming director of HR, and then eventually vice president for financial operations. So Jim was there. Across the hall was the VP for research, Tom Jones, who was this delightful Southern gentleman. He passed away, unfortunately, a few years later, but he was a delightful Southern gentleman right across the hallway. And I mean a gentleman in a real old sense of the word. Whenever I go to see Tom, whatever the business was, you always had to sit a spell. Come in, sit a spell and talk. They had to talk about something else, then get around to the business. But he was a really nice guy. And Ken Smith from chemical engineering was VP for research at the time. And he was right around the corner. And then I really got to interact with all these people. My title then was Assistant Equal Opportunity Officer, so I had another reason to go make the rounds and talk to people and get involved with academic council members. And I met this interesting guy named Constantine, who by anybody's definition was a force in terms of his personality. Very warm, inviting, European-style personality. And his work ethic, the man was just, he carried 2 suitcases. He just had his hand in everything all the time. And it was very clear to me instantly, here's a man who the faculty respect and listen to, and the administration respect and listen to, and he was right in the middle as the translator between these two camps. And he was in the president's office. Really interesting guy. Well, 6 months after I went to work for John, he told me he was retiring. And he's the one who gave me this, this notion. I said to John, why you lured me over here and you're retiring? He told me if I told you, you wouldn't have stayed. And he was right. But he had gotten me into the habit of coming in at 7:30 in the mornings because I had an opportunity. John was an early riser. He would always get here. He'd have coffee sitting in his office. And I'd arrive and grab some coffee and go sit and talk with him. And I just learned so much about MIT. The people, the organizations, his take on issues and problems, etc. And then he would talk about himself a bit. And he had decided that when he reached 60, he wanted to do something different with the rest of his life. And I thought, oh, this is an interesting idea. And what he ended up doing was going to work with his wife, who was a tennis professional, who had a store down at Faneuil Hall, and I think in Chestnut Hill also, for tennis and apra-tennis clothes. And he went to be her financial person, just to work with her and have some fun. And I said to myself, now that sounds like a good idea, and 60 would be a good time to do it. And we talked a little bit about that, and he said to me, if you're going to do this, you better start saving. And this was consistent with what my mom had said to me, save aggressively till it hurts and put it where you can't get it. And John reinforced that. He said, if you want to do something independent with your life at 60, you have to be financially prepared to do it. Or at least know that you have a floor under you that will keep you financially secure. And I never forgot that, and I started to save really aggressively, and then the rest I'm paying. I'm doing okay now. But John left in March of 1980, and then my role was reassigned to Constantine, and I went to work with Constantine, and that was just just an amazing experience. He was such a character. He knew everybody. He was into everything. He had a vision of people in life that was very affirming. I think he embodied everything all of the good virtues of this organization that made me want to stay and be a part of it. And he was a mentor. And I found myself with several mentors, with Constantine and Jim Cullerton and Bill Dixon. What a group of mentors. You can't have a better bunch than that. People who are in your corner. And I was getting along very well with the provosts. Walter Rosenbluth had a reputation as being a fire-breathing dragon, but I just found him to be a very, very nice man, and could go talk to him about whatever was on my mind, and he was always gracious.
So the first project you worked on, or one with, was computerizing.
That was, yeah. Actually, before that, what led to that was 79 to 81, when I was working for John and then Constantine. There was a period when the Department of Labor was very aggressive about compliance reviews, affirmative action compliance reviews. MIT had always, up to that point, had been generating its data in a particular format that was understandable for and suitable to MIT internally, but was completely orthogonal to the way the feds wanted to see data. And of course, being MIT, big, powerful MIT, we were able to hold out for a long time and say, this is the way we do it. Finally, the Fed said, no, we want it this way. So I embarked on a project, and it turns out a young man from Sloan, who was doing a master's degree, came over and wanted to work with me on it. He just came out of the blue, and his name is Kevin Lonnie, Lonnie. So Kevin came over, and the two of us embarked on what turned out to be a year-long project to recast all of MIT's staff and employees by hand from our classification system into the EEO6 classification scheme. We had to go through everybody, reclassify them, put them in matrices, et cetera, and then eventually have that computerized. But that was like doing another dissertation. And we did it by hand. I look back on it, I've still got the thing down there, and I flip through this thing every once in a while and think how absolutely crazy we were to have done this. But Kevin got his master's degree, and I got these, again, it was one of those impossible things. So out of it, it was very clear that HR systems needed to be jiggered. And of course, Constantine basically looked at me and said, well, go do it. And there had been a project over there to computerize the HR records process, but the process was behind schedule and very, very significantly over budget. And when I talked to the man, George Petijevich, who had been trying to get that system up and running, it became instantly clear to me, this isn't a technology issue. This is an issue of management. Somebody has to decide what we're going to do and not do. Plus, there were two offices. There were two records offices, a faculty records office and a personnel records office. And the faculty records office was this little elite group. Every time you walked in, you were looked at suspiciously. What do you want? Why are you here? This is the faculty records office, And across the hall was the personnel records office, which was comprised of a bunch of clerks, low-level clerks, who were not trusted to do anything. They had phones. They couldn't dial out of the institution. They were in this horrible area without outside windows. There was a sink and counter in there, and everybody would bring their dirty dishes and dump them in that sink and expect those clerks to clean them up. And I kind of looked at all that and said, oh, I'll take care of this. So the first thing to do was to combine the two offices into one operation without firing anybody. I decided I wasn't going to fire anybody, even though there was tremendous resistance from the faculty records office to change. And I just kept working with them and finally reorganized. And actually, the person who was running that office, I saw another opportunity that I thought would better utilize this person's skills in another place in HR, and got the other manager to agree to take her. And turned out to have been the best thing that ever happened to her. And I combined these two operations into one office, brought in computers at that point. They were word processors. Digital had a wonderful bunch of word processors at that time that were state of the art at the time, and brought those in, trained the staff to do those things, cut that sink in half, and basically said to the rest of HR, to the rest of the department, you bring your dirty dishes here one more time and I'm taking the whole damn sink out. Oh, no. My people are not going to be cleaning your dishes. I see dirty dishes there again, it goes. You can't do that. You can't do that. Now, this is my office now. And that got cleaned up, and of course my staff thought I was a hero. I had the phones changed so that they were A-class phones, and I basically said to people, you're on your own. I don't expect you all to be calling home and having boyfriends and all that calling in here all the time. I expect you to use this responsibly. And they said, oh yeah, we only wanted, we only wanted to be treated like everybody else. And I redecorated the place, brought in plants, went over to, I don't think it was called List then, I don't remember, but it was the art collection. And had some of my staff come over and pick out artworks, and we put them up on the wall and gave my staff respect because they were producing all of the appointment letters for everybody. They were working like dogs and weren't being treated well. So, and started hiring a more diverse group because it was an entry level to MIT, and I found very quickly that people wanted to hire my staff away. They were well trained. But once I brought those word processors in, and they, in a couple of months, they knew how to word process documents. These people were in demand, and that was great. So that worked out well. And then from reorganizing and getting that system up and running, by basically making decisions about what bells and whistles we would have and not have, I came into the orbit of Jim Bruce and his crew. Jim Bruce and Marilyn McMillan and Cecilia De Oliveira and others. And by that time, early 80s, the IBM PC came on the market. Jim Cullerton bought me an IBM PC. I've never forgotten that thing landed on my desk. And wow, Jim was director of HR at the time. And I promptly called up some of the guys from IS who were upstairs, down to the office, and let's open this thing. Let's see what's inside it. So we promptly took the thing apart and put it back together again and saw how little was in there. And I think the thing had the blazing speed of 7 megahertz, which was just astonishing back then. 7 megahertz, my gosh. So I learned DOS, started playing with the thing and programming it, et cetera. And because I was one of the first administrators around here to do this, I quickly became the guru. Other people were getting him. Well, Ike knows how to. Ike has had his machine. Let's call him. And next thing you knew, the phone kept ringing, and people were asking me how to do this, and that. So I became a savvy user. And Jim Bruce and his crew and I used to talk about the future of these things. And we said these things are going to be everywhere. These things are going to replace mainframes as we know them. And why don't we why shouldn't MIT get out ahead on this? So Jim and Marilyn and Cecilia and I went to Bill Dixon, who by then was the VP, and convinced him to give us some money so that we could go off on the side and develop a strategic plan for administrative computing. And I remember Bill looking at us quite askance. He didn't quite know whether we were crazy or stupid or what, but but he knew we were convinced that we were on to something. So, and Jim was director of IS at the time, and he gave us some money, and we went off and squirreled ourselves away for 4 months, I think it was, mostly at Jim's house. And we developed a strategic plan for administrative computing that put these things on everybody's desks. When we came back with that plan, they bought it. To my shock and amazement, they bought it.
What year was this?
This was 84. 84. We started in 83. We finished it in 84. Maybe it was 85, but I think it was 84. And because then it took a while to get things in place. And one of the implications for the plan was that the main administrative computing systems had to change. At that time, everybody had a big mainframe. Purchasing, with Barry, director of purchasing had his big mainframe for all the purchasing stuff. Financial operations had its big mainframes because everybody had something. And the controller's office had something, accounts payable had something, accounts receivable had something else, payroll, the investments area, all of them had their own machines, and none of them cared about whether they were talking to the other one. They were basically all throwing data over the wall to the next one and let them handle it. So it was kind of a bit of a chaos. And we knew that had to change. Guess who got asked to go over and corral that? By that time, Jim Cullerton had become vice president for financial operations, and he had been a big supporter of the strategic plan. And so a few of us got sent out to various areas to create additional change. And the change that I knew was needed over in the financial operations area, was to get them to work together in acquiring and modifying strategic financial computing systems. But these were all, I mean, these were all 800-pound gorillas. And I'm saying, how am I going to make this happen? So the first thing I did was convince Jim to give me all the money. That, in fact, nobody could make a major computing purchase without my recommending it to the vice president. Okay, so everybody kind of knew, okay, here's this little guy coming over, and we got to go through him. So day one on the job, I moved back over to E19. No, actually, my office wasn't in E19. It was up on Building 8, right across the hall from Margaret McVicker. As a matter of fact, this is how I got to know Margaret. But the work was in E19, and day one on the job, I went to talk to the controller. Was it controller? Yeah, I went to a guy named Phil Cohane, who ran. He was controller, and Phil was a tough guy. He was a real tough guy. He had this huge operation, and he ran it with an iron fist. So I went in to introduce myself. He knew who I was, to talk with him about my new role, etc. And I noticed he kept the door wide open, which is unusual. The staff was outside of the office, and Phil started to yell at me, saying, young man, you're coming over here, you think you're going to make change, and da. Well, just understand, and he's yelling, I'm not going to take any shit out of you. And I said to myself, oh, I see what this is. So I got my street on, and I yelled right back at him and said, I'm not going anywhere. You're going to have to work for me. I used a term that I don't use very often. And I said, if you and the other want to play rough, I'll play rough too. But I'm not going. And I yelled at the top of my voice, and all these people heard it. And I understood what this was. This was Phil saying to his staff and showing to his staff that I was willing to stand up to him. And if I was willing to stand up to him, toe-to-toe with him, then maybe we could get things done. But I realized that. But at the time, I kind of thought, well, maybe I've also just lost my job on the first day. So I went over to talk to Jim about it. And Jim looked at me and said, so what did you say? And I told him what I said. And he said, oh, well, I bet you got his attention, didn't you? And actually, things went just fine after that. But it was Phil making a demonstration that I was not going to be a pushover. Took me a second took a couple minutes to understand that. So the long and short of it was that to get what I needed done, it wasn't a question of, I knew that it would be impossible if I tried to go head to head with everybody. You couldn't order these guys to do things. It didn't make sense because these were all powers in their own right. The thing to do was to get them to come to the table together. So my trick was to create a council and call all of their computer people and the managers to regular meetings. And the agenda of the meetings, what I set, was to talk about their systems and their visions for modifying or moving their systems to another place. And it took maybe 5 minutes for things to take off. I think it was director of purchasing who started talking about buying a digital mainframe or a bull. I think he was going to buy a bull computer, and I think probably hardly got the word out of his mouth before somebody else started saying, what are you going to do with that? Why are you going to do something like that? Why aren't you talking to me about this? If you do that, this is going to be the impact on me. And others started chiming in. And all I did was moderate the discussion. And it wasn't long before they all began to say, well, what if I do this and what if I do that? What would you do? And they began to quickly see that they were collaborating and cooperating in a way they never had before. And I knew I had won this one when about a year later, This was late 86, or early 87 or so. I got invited out to a golf game with the boys. Now, I don't know one end of a golf club from another, and they knew that. They invited me out to golf course, and got me up there to tee off. You know, they're all standing around there watching, and many of these guys are really good golfers, you know. And they just knew I was going to make a total fool of myself, and so did I. And it got to be absolutely hilarious, actually, when I was cracking up. As I'm swinging at these balls, and when I did hit something, it would go flopping back somewhere or the other. And after I sufficiently embarrassed myself, you know, it was clear that I'd just been inducted into the group, and you know, we've all had a good laugh about that ever since, and became really good friends with those guys. Really good colleagues.
About 10 years after you graduated with your PhD,
yeah.
Did you have any aspirations for teaching?
None.
Or researching?
Well, I certainly didn't expect my career to go like this. You know, the computer stuff were the toys of my field, the new toys of my field. I didn't have an intrinsic interest in them. It was, okay, I need to know something about these to get something done. And I did. I learned what I needed to learn. But when I got here and folks saw, you know, I knew my way around a computer, that just took me off in an entirely different direction. So it was around 87 or so that I was getting calls from outside of MIT with headhunters interested in somebody to run a information center or computer centers, et cetera. And I was saying to myself, no. No, this is not what I want. And Mark, yeah, yeah.
You were working with Jim Bruce, Bill Dixon, and everything. Like the fact that you have a PhD from Brown, you know, but
yeah, that helped.
An expertise completely different than what you're working on. Was that a point of?
Oh, I think. No, having the PhD opened more doors. I think one of the things around MIT that I think is true at MIT is having a doctorate suggests that you can run a project, you can learn things quickly, and maybe you can be flexible. There was never much interest in what I had the PhD in, except the psychology department. They were always at me to come back to the fold, but I was doing more fun things at the time. No, I think having the PhD just sort of said something to everybody about the kind of education one has, the kind of experiences one is likely to have had, and something about a level of capability to run a complex project, to make an original contribution to something, and to be able to learn fast. And I found, you know, no one was, until I came to this office, no one was quite so interested in the psychology part of it. And they misinterpreted it anyway. They always thought it was psychology with a couch, not research. So here's where Margaret McVicker comes in. It's just such an amazing place. You know, I had this office across from Margaret McVicker, this physicist who was tenured at the school level, and she had been busily creating and building this Europe program, which I thought was just an absolutely wonderful idea. And Margaret was very direct, no nonsense kind of woman, really nice person, but she always had an agenda. You know, always had an agenda with something. And we talked, and we would talk and chat in the hallway a little bit. And I thought, wow, this is a really smart person. Then I found out she had cancer, several cancers. And saw her being incredibly effective and focused despite that, and I thought, wow, I'm looking at a heroine here. She never let it get in her way. She really never let it get in her way, and I just really respected her for that, because it was clear that she was in pain and but never let it get in her way. And then there was one day in the hallway. This was 1987, or maybe 88, somewhere late 87. I'm standing in the hallway talking, having a conversation with Jim Colbert and Joan Rice. And she walks up to us. And just a strange little conversation. She said, "You're Ike, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, Margaret, my office is across the hallway from you." And she said, "You used to be an academic, weren't you?" I said, "Well, I taught over at Northeastern and did some research." She said, yeah. "Have you ever thought about going back to the academic side of the house?" And I said, "Well, if you mean teaching again, I'd have to go back to graduate school. I've been out of this for too long. I'd have to go back to graduate school." And she said, "Oh, there are other things you can do." And then she turned around and walked away. I looked and said, "Now that was weird." And Joan said, "She's probably got something in mind. Just hold your breath." And so some months later, I got this call from Frank Perkins, who I'd worked with in the strategic plan. One of my tasks in the process of the strategic plan was to head a group looking at the future of telecommunications on campus. And this faculty member, Frank, joined the group. He didn't know anything about communications. I didn't know much more, but we had the IT people who were more than happy to educate us about it, with Schiller and the whole group. Great group of quintessential nerds, who were just delighted to tell us, to educate us about telecommunications stuff. And wow, did we learn a lot really quickly. Frank threw himself at it, I threw myself at it. We both had a wonderful time and got to know each other. Well, he tells me later that he had this conversation with Margaret about getting me over here to help reorganize the graduate school. And so Frank called me and told me that John Turner, my predecessor, was going to be leaving, and he'd like me to consider coming over as associate dean to run the office. And I knew John Turner quite well. John had focused on minority graduate student recruitment to some great effect. But that wasn't what I wanted to do. I said to Frank, "Well, I'm not coming over there to be the black dean. That's what you want. I'm not interested in that. I think there are other things I can do." And he said, "Yeah, I know. I'm not interested in you being the black dean either. I'm interested in having somebody come over to help change this office." And I thought about it, and we talked for a little while about what it was he really wanted. And he really wanted this office to become more student-centered. And that meant some massive changes in what the work was. So I came over here in '88, in the summer of '88, and I walked into an office that was absolutely awash in paper. It was just mind-boggling to me. All of the RA and TA appointments and changes and petitions, all of that was coming into this office. So students couldn't get paid unless that paperwork was processed, and it was all coming into 2 desks here. There were 2 dumb terminals tied to a mainframe here, first relic of the past. Of course, all the paperwork came in at the last minute. There were always lines of angry students outside the door. They hadn't gotten paid, or something had gone wrong. The office was being viewed as a roadblock. And I sort of said, okay, this is going to have to change. So I came in and I did a TQM exercise. I wanted to know everything about the operation of this office and the paperwork and the flow and the why and the wherefore, who gets it, why do they get this paper, why is there a 7-part form, and who gets it, why do they need this, how does this work get done, how does it originate in departments and come here. And what quickly became apparent was that we needed a new computer system that captured the information out where it was generated. And so I pushed for that pretty quickly. And thus MITSIS. Thus MITSIS eventually came. And what that did was free up my staff. In fact, in designing, I was very much involved in designing the first implementation of MITSIS. And one of the key requirements for me was to have a system we figured that 95% of the stuff people put in is right. It's just a small percentage you have to deal with. And I wanted flags put in the system. I didn't want anybody in here to have to look at every appointment and every change. What I wanted was flags set in the system so that if entries fell outside of certain parameters, then those things would come to the office. Would alert one of the clerks, and there was something to look at. And of course, the reality is that it's about 2% of stuff, maybe 1%. 1.5%, 2% of stuff really is a problem. And so there was some education of departments. They could no longer blame us if students didn't get paid because you didn't put in your stuff. You didn't put it in, don't blame us. And so it cleared up the staff to start doing other things, to start developing programs for student support, to open the office for students who wanted to come in and talk about anything, problems, issues, etc. Suddenly the dean and I were available. And students, the administration wants to talk to us. First it was the administration wants to talk to us. We must be in trouble. But the administration wants to talk to us, and they began to come in and realize that we could be of an adjunctive resource to the department, especially for issues and problems that many students didn't feel comfortable first surfacing in the departments. And we just became more student-centered and more student-centered. And then came re-engineering. To this day, I don't know whether that was a mistake or not, but yes, I do. Yes, I do. There were some aspects of it that were a mistake and some that were inevitable. But I got asked to be one of the 8 core team members for re-engineering of administrative systems here.
What were the others?
Let's see, there was Steve Scarano. There was, oh my gosh, this is me, Steve Scarano. Oh my gosh, she's down at NYU. Jim Bruce is second. Marilyn McMillan. From financial area. Wow, you're testing my memory now. I can't remember all of us now. Jill. I got to go back in and look at it now. But there were 8 of us. And then there was a steering committee with Bill Dixon and Jim Bruce and Constantine and who else? Joan Rice was on the steering committee. Basically, the senior officers were in the steering committee, and we were off with Jim Champy's consulting firm, looking at the quote low-hanging fruit and how we were going to change how administrative work got done. Well, my assignment in this is we began to clearly see that culture was going to change here, and that there were some ways of doing business here that had to change. My assignment was to interact with the faculty on this. I was a communications person. The faculty at first was seeing this as, oh, this is administrative stuff. We don't have to be concerned about that. Leave us alone. And my job was to go around and say, hey folks, you need to know. There's some things you need to know about re-engineering how we do work. And let me give you an example. How do you get your mail delivered now? And it turns out that everybody used to get their mail delivered right to their desks by a mail carrier who they all came to know. It was a very personal, labor-intensive kind of thing, but it was part of the way MIT operated. It was care and feeding. Well, you're going to have to go downstairs to the mail center and get your mail. And the reaction was, what? Why should we have to do this? Blah, 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 because it's more effective. So don't say re-engineering isn't going to affect you. Your office isn't going to be cleaned every day anymore. It's going to be cleaned on a schedule, and so forth. Little changes that had a big psychological impact on faculty and staff. And my job was to make people understand that this is something they needed to pay attention to, something they needed to comment on, have an oar in the water on, because it was going to affect all of MIT. And of course, two things happened for me. One was that I got lots of spears in the chest. It was sort of, well, you know, we appreciate you telling us this, Ike, and this, you know, it isn't about you, but. But the second thing was that I got to have many, many conversations with faculty in the departments, in groups and alone, and they found out, I mean, the way I operate, that, you know, I tell them what I know, I never lie to them. I will never lie to you. I may not know the answer on something, or I may not know everything about this, but what I know, I'm prepared to tell you. And you can always double check to make sure. And I made sure I never told anybody anything that wasn't true to the best of my knowledge. There were some questions they asked about financial details that I just couldn't answer, but I knew a lot, and I always laid it out to them. And I think that just built my credibility with the faculty, which paid off later. But re-engineering changed the place, and it has not changed it for the better. And for that I'm a little sorry about. There is one aspect that I think has been for the better, and that's financial systems. We really did need to fully integrate our financial systems, and SAP was the right answer, but there was a whole lot of blood on the floor with that, and major changes in how work gets done and who's doing it. It's led to a less personal attention to people, which has been an important part of the culture of MIT, that you could call somebody, you know that person knew you, knew your organization, rather than dealing with some system or being sent through telephone trees with pre-selected answers, etc. What began to change, one of the things that began to change was this sort of personal attention to people. Of course, the other thing that was changing at the same time was the place was just exploding. Research was just exploding here. The number of graduate students was growing by leaps and bounds. The research enterprises were, the labs just getting bigger and more complicated, more postdocs coming in, more of this, more of that, more of everything except faculty. The faculty sizes stayed pretty stable, but this enterprise was just growing and becoming much more complex. And the other thing that was changing pretty rapidly too was federal reporting requirements. Just the sheer amount of drudgery and paperwork to do anything was just drowning everybody, and it still is actually. Just much more oversight about everything, and much more ridiculous reporting and certifying about this, that, and the other. Just a nightmare. And there's no end in sight to that. But collectively, when you put all that stuff together, it really has changed the feel of the place. And of course, the look of the place has been changing as we've been putting up some interesting new structures, some of which I like, some of which I think are abysmal. And I think it has, the culture here has shifted a lot. People point to re-engineering as being the tripwire for that, making the place more corporate, but I don't think, I think people, those who went through it have that in mind as the seminal event in MIT changing, but it really was a host of things coming together at the same time. It's changed it, some of which, even though the faculty are complaining about it, they voted with their feet on. They treadmill of research, bigger groups, more. Creating MEng programs, dramatically expanding the MBA program, more graduate students, more. Can't blame that on the administration. But there's plenty of blame to go around with how the place has evolved, and the gradual diminution of what most people see, what most people recall, long-timers recall, as a nurturing place where the individual really counts, where you can reach out to the right person to respond to any problem or need. That ethic still exists here. And there's still this interest in who's the person to call for this. I've got an issue. Who do I call on that one? But it's less and less possible to do that these days. So that was re-engineering. And then after re-engineering, that was 93 to almost 95. Frank Perkins, who was then the dean, decided he was going. He was going to retire. He had been dean for about 13 years at that point, and he was ready to retire. And he gave a full year of notification for that. And by that time, Chuck was president, and nobody believed him. Nobody believed Frank was going to retire. So the Institute really didn't do anything about it. It was really, he was going to leave on September 1st. It was August 15th before the organization realized Frank was serious, and he'd been saying all along, I'm retiring, and I'm not staying on. I'm not going to be convinced to stay on any longer. You better start thinking about an interim dean, an acting dean. And it wasn't until mid-August that he really was finally taken seriously, and then Chuck called me up to the office to ask if I would serve as acting dean for the fall term, of 1995-96. While they figured out what to do.
So you were acting dean of?
I was acting dean of the graduate school. This office has had several name changes. For years it was, the title was dean of the graduate school, and this was called the graduate school office, but MIT's never had a graduate school. Then it became dean for graduate education, and then it became dean for graduate students. The committee was formed, headed by Steve Tannenbaum, who was then in toxicology and is now in bioengineering. Len Hobbs, others were part of that committee. And I came to know what the committee recommended, but I was never allowed to see the report. The committee recommended that the Institute take a jog to the side and have someone who was not a member of the faculty be dean, me. The provost at the time wasn't having it. So he...
Mark Wrighton?
No, this wasn't, Mark had just left. Mark left in 95 to become chancellor of Washington U in St. Louis, and then Joel Moses became provost. Joel wanted the vice. There's another model of this kind of operation, is having the vice president for research also be dean for graduate matters. Many places across the country have that. Many find that it's a challenge. Dave Litzter was vice president for research, and he was asked to take on the title of dean for graduate education. Dave promptly, now the VP for research has something like 20 direct reports, so all the big labs and centers. So Dave promptly turned to me and said, I'm not doing this job. I've got more than enough on my plate. You're the dean. I don't have time to go to the meetings. I don't have time to do these things. And he was really serious about this, that he knew it was a serious job that needed attention. And given what was going on in research, with this continued rapid growth in research, and all of these federal issues around funding and stuff coming up, and legislation coming up, that's where his attention had to be. So I ran the committee on graduate school programs. I had money, ran full authority in the office, everything. My title was Senior Associate Dean. And I went through this period with the CGSP. Committee on Graduate School Programs is a huge committee. It was a huge committee, comprised of a faculty representative from every department or degree granting program, and it had been in place for years. So it had gotten up to about 35, a committee of 35 or so. Just, you know. So I would go to I was setting the agenda and going to the meetings, and the faculty were really, they quite accepted me, but we had this regular little drama going on. I'd start the meeting, and somebody, usually Gordon, well, I won't say who it was, but usually somebody was saying, "Okay, Dean Colbert, will this be the time that we'll be graced with the presence of Dean Litzner?" And they wanted to see, okay, what kind of excuse will he come up with this time? And I said, well, you know, the vice president has a lot of things on his plate, and I'm afraid he's got an agenda down in Washington today, and blah, 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 blah. They kind of look at each other and look at me, and and then we go with the meeting. You know, the next month, somebody would ask me the same question, you know, and there was sort of smiles all around. So what's he going to say now? You know? And this just went on, you know. And, but it was very clear that I was being fully accepted as the dean. And finally, when on the day that Bob Brown and Larry Backow were named provost and chancellor, Larry had been chair of the faculty and become a friend. Larry came down to my office to say, I have something to tell you. And I looked at him and said, "You're not telling me you're going to leave MIT, are you?" And he said, "No, I've just been made the chancellor." MIT, what? You meant what? And he said, first, you know, Bob and I talked, and the first thing we're going to do, you've been the dean for some years, the faculty recognize you as the dean. We talked to Dave Litzner about this, and you're going to be the dean. And I was overwhelmed. And the rest is history. And then I began to figure out my agenda. Well, I knew what my agenda would be if I ever had the title, but it was to create a life for graduate students outside of the labs. And that's what became my agenda.
Now, in all these administrative turf battle struggles and clashes of ideologies, the fact that you were in an administrative post in an institution where faculty
run things,
relied upon to be administrators, you're not a faculty member. Did that ever come up as a point of contention? Like, how did you negotiate?
No, it never came up as a point of contention, and I think it's because I'd built my street credibility with the faculty over a period of years through the re-engineering stuff, through just being the dean, helping to solve a lot of problems, making the office student-centered. I think I had the street credibility at that point. And they did not have a problem. And plus, they had seen me in action with the CGSP. And I used to talk with the senior-most faculty on that committee, you know, one-on-one occasionally. And say, look, you know, I need to know from you guys if you're having any problems with decisions that I make or issues. And I said, no, so I'd like to come to you all the time. Oh, I'll talk to you about that. Oh, act with power. You know, act with power. It became three words that I came to dislike. You know, act with power. I came to dislike them because, on the one hand, it was a wonderful show of confidence and support that, you know, we trust you. But on the other hand, with the committee so huge, you don't get the kind of collaboration and thinking about things. You know, acting with power is wonderful, but it's much better to act in close collaboration with faculty. So it was clear that committee structure had to change. If you have a committee of 35, you have a committee of 1, whoever's running it. Right, so that had to change.
Blanche mentioned that in your style, that you want to view as it's easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission.
Well, yeah, you do have to. Yeah, there is one of the things around here that's important is to, you have to have a vision and you have to have the strength of your conviction around things and not necessarily wait for everybody to say this is all right, but to go ahead and do something that you know is right to do, and let the rest catch up with you on this. And it's easier to get forgiveness than permission to go and do this. And here's the example is my agenda for graduate life here. I told you what a wonderful time I had in graduate school, and I thought this is the way it should be. And looking at this incredibly talented and hardworking and often visionary group, cadres of graduate students here, it became clear that while they're getting a lot of attention in the departments, there's something that they're missing. And they're missing a piece that would give them more opportunities for what I call priceless encounters outside of the lab that might in fact spark some important aspect of their careers and their lives. Because often the most important things that happen in graduate school have nothing to do with the lab. And we've got this international, now very diverse group of people who are going to operate on the world stage, and they need to know each other. And we needed to create programs and venues and opportunities for them to meet both in structured settings and in unstructured settings, so that they could learn from each other and contribute to one another's development. And that's just something that complements everything in the department. Well, I kind of made this case in an academic council meeting one day, and the provost looks at me and says, "What are you talking about, Ike? We bring him here to work." General laughter. And I took that as the challenge. Okay. All right, so I'm being told leave him alone. It's not right to leave him alone. So I embarked on my campaign to bring the data to the table, to bring the advocacy agenda to the fore, with alumni, with current graduate students, with my staff, and with allies in other departments whose work serves graduate students, to make very clear we got to do things differently. And alumni gave me the first opportunity to do this. They brought into this very quickly, and for a very good reason. I pointed out to them when I looked at the numbers, hey folks, the majority of our students are graduate students now. Who's going to be giving in 15 years, 20 years, if graduate students are leaving here not feeling connected to the place? That was a very pretty persuasive observation, but I wanted to have a quiet exploration of graduate community. We had this report back in '97 or so on student life, and they talked about community for undergraduates. This was in the wake of Scott Kruger's death and Chuck's decision to bring freshmen on campus, and all of the wringing of hands around what that meant for the undergraduate community. And I'm sitting here thinking, wait a minute, community means something for graduate students too, because they don't have one. But I wanted to test the proposition. What does it mean? What might it mean for you? So alumni arranged for me to get to Hong Kong. I had to go give a talk in Shanghai, and I agreed to give that talk if the people who brought me to Shanghai would get me to Hong Kong. And then alumni had arranged for me to meet with a whole group of alums. Some Chinese, some expats, some just people working in the financial industry there. And I got to Hong Kong in this driving rain. I'd never seen rain like that in my life. And I'm staying over in Kowloon and bouncing across the river, the harbor and the Star Ferry, you know, thinking, oh boy, this is going to be a disaster. You know, it's pouring buckets. Nobody's going to show to this thing. This is a waste of time, but I'll show up. So I got to the meeting room. It was in a big conference room. One of the main drivers of the Alumni Association, Tony. Gosh, what was Tony's last name? I'm forgetting Tony's last name right now. But they had arranged for all these people to be at this meeting, and I kind of thought, okay, I'm going to go in there and talk to all two of them, you know. And I opened the door, and this room was jammed with people, and they burst into applause. It's like, oh my gosh. And immediately I was being told no graduate dean had ever talked to them before. Nobody had ever singled them out as graduate alumni. Rather, they'd all been mixed in with the undergraduates and just sort of ignored. And nobody wanted to listen to what they had to say. And
were these like MBAs, PhDs,
the whole mix. MBAs, PhDs, and a few undergrad alums too, actually, who were there. But they had something. And then my question was, what did you come to MIT to get? What did you actually get? What would have made it better for you? And how does the idea, in what ways does the notion of community as one of the legs of the triad of research, education, and community mean to graduate students? And they just unloaded. And I knew I had the right thing. I knew I was on the right track. And so I came back, and Alumni Association, Paul Ozuski, Jim Lash was there, was head of alumni at the time. They got it right away. They absolutely got it. That there were all these things that MIT could and should do for graduate students to make them feel as connected to the institution as they are to their departments and labs, and that was important down the line. They absolutely got it, and they became instant allies. So we got the president of the Alumni Association on board, yeah, and deep into alumni. And the graduate students, of course, were no sweat at all. They saw the need for graduate students to have more resources for life available to them. So they were instant allies. And then there were people in careers office and other places that saw immediately that there were things to do, things that were important about this agenda. And so all this started to come together. The provost, or Bob, and to his enduring credit, which is one of the things I've never failed to appreciate about Bob Brown, was that as this all began to coalesce, and he saw where this was going, he bought into it and got out ahead of it. Oh, you bring the data to Bob, he might have a particular point of view in the beginning, but you bring the information to him that shows him, well, maybe I need to think this again. And he saw this was the right thing to do, and boom, Bob became a champion for it, which was great, because you got the provost in your corner, and alumni, and the graduate students, and administrators. Great.
Well, at the same time, this would be kind of a related topic to get into the sort of reforms you accomplished at other universities around the country, the late 90s, early, the turn of the century, millennium, running into problems of graduate students wanting to
unionize, yeah.
Did you ever have a sense that was something that was afoot, or were you able to stay ahead of the ball?
Oh, we stayed ahead. We certainly were keeping our eye on that to see to what extent that might happen here. One of the things that was very clear to me is that why that would not have happened here, even though there were some organizers playing around the edges here, but first of all, we've never used our graduate students as teaching drones. In fact, we paid TAs a premium to TA because research is the name of the game here. Most students here are on RAs or fellowships. So we never had anywhere near majority of our graduate students TAing. So that was, and we treated them well. So that was one in many, many universities around the country, especially the bigger ones. In fact, graduate students have been used as teaching drones, and that's a disservice to them and a distraction from their education as far as I'm concerned. So that wasn't an issue. It's always been extraordinarily difficult to get research staff and people organized or seeing a value of unions for them. And of course our students are very smart and they do their homework very thoroughly, and they of course looked at what's happened with those schools in which graduate students have become unionized. They've lost ground. They've lost money, they've lost resources, et cetera. It hasn't been a boon to them. And they're paying, these unions dues and not getting anything from it. So our students are very smart. They see when something's not useful for them. So I was never seriously concerned that our students might unionize. But I was certainly willing to use that, to call up the specter of that from time to time as the bête noire in the background, just in case we didn't move on making our lives, our graduate students, better. But it was never really seriously an issue here. The real serious issue was how do we get our graduate students to be more invested in the institution. And one was we needed to have more living on campus instead of scattered out in these communities, increasingly far away. We needed to find ways to get more faculty involved with our students outside of the lab, so that meant some residency. We needed to have programmable community spaces where programs could happen. And that meant something about the kinds of structures we would build and the funding structure and the income streams from them. A community room doesn't generate rent, so it's an issue. But what we've done along the way is to build residence halls that have been that were the early envy of our peers. They would send spies around to see what we were doing, seeing that we were willing to invest in residence halls that focused on community. Large amounts of community facilities and resources. And we would build our dorms around that. Harvard, Stanford, others came out to look at this and marvel that MIT was willing to make that kind of investment. And I'm just, yeah. And that really kept the ball rolling. Back in the early 90s, as the graduate students in this office, started a mantra of 2,000 beds in 2000. That was when the grad school was a little smaller then, and 2,000 beds would have housed half of our students. The notion was to house 50% of our graduate students on campus. Of course, by 2000, we were still behind the curve on the number of beds, but we're pretty much there now. We're almost there now. And that kept, that co-advocacy has kept this ball rolling. And now it's self-sustaining. The next big event that really has helped move it forward was, in a strange way, the institution of the student life fee, because that gave this office certainly a stable funding mechanism for what I chose to do, was to set up a process to experiment in community building. I always figured, I think I know it when I see it. But one, I'm a lot older than everybody else, and they don't need some old fart trying to tell them what will be good for building the graduate community here and what will be right for building a graduate community here. Why don't I ask them? Why don't I ask them to give some proposals and let's try some experiments? And indeed, I got some real surprises. And one of my quintessential anecdotes about that is when one of the groups proposed a program called Weekly Wednesdays at the Muddy Charles Pub. And the proposal was that I buy $12,000 worth of chicken wings over the course of a year. And my reaction to that was they want me to do what? Chicken, you've got to be kidding. You got to be out of your mind. You think I'm going to buy chicken wings? But the committee, I had a committee comprised of half students and half administrators, came back to me and said, we think this might work. It might sound funny, but we think it might work, and it's worth trying. And I said, okay, $12,000 worth of chicken wings, all right. And it has turned out to have been one of the most popular, one of the most enduring programs we could have imagined. And of course, I couldn't have imagined it at first. But Weekly Wednesday still goes on. And it's morphed a little, but it's basically this time when graduate students and TAC work groups, whatever, come together on Wednesday nights at the pub. There's free food. There's chicken wings. Now I think it's more to other things, but it just provides a social medium for students to come together, and it really works. And when I thought about it, it's quite reminiscent of things at Fawn's House at Brown, the student center, when I was there. You know, the student pub, the pub down there. You could get beer. Chicken wings weren't big then, but you could get beer and a sandwich. And it was popular. There were popular nights there, where you could get beer and a cheap beer and a cheap sandwich, and lots of graduate students came together there. So that was one of the examples. And there was another one where I said no, where someone proposed an MIT dating service called Odds Are Good. But the goods are odd. I borrowed a line from Jorge on that one, Jorge Cham on that one. Odds are good. I said, no, I don't think we're going to do that.
You mentioned how strong sort of student life at Brown was and how that kind of influenced you.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you're also politically active.
Yeah.
So I want to get a sense from you that having seen either the role of that kind of advocacy and involvement when you were in graduate school versus the kind of advocacy and political movements that you see now. How has it evolved? And its contribution
it's certainly different. I don't think we have I think we have the national political challenges that ought to have many students out in the streets, but they don't do that now. This generation has some different interests. One of the things that I'm really very pleased to see is the amount of public service that this generation of graduate students is interested in and committed to giving. I mean, the public service center's work, Sally Susnowitz's office, has grown dramatically, and in fact, I've budgeted out a piece of student life money to make sure that graduate students can be involved in service learning and in community service at various levels. The amount of the work down in the D lab, in Amy Smith's lab for sustainable development, I've been very supportive of, and I've slipped a little money out there too. These are things that students are interested in that change the world for somebody. The interest in community building across departments is something that students have put some energy in. So I put the STEAM Cafe. It's a little underground activity of mine to support that and not be terribly visible about it, but make sure it happened. Has brought urban studies and architecture together in ways that they couldn't have before. So I think the activism is different. It's not political in the sense that they're struggling against the Bush administration or against the rapidly expanding presidency. But let me not go there too much. That there isn't the level of protest against this war or these wars that there would have been back in my day, but there was universal. Everybody had to sign up. And when we went to a volunteer army, that changed the landscape. So there's not the imminent danger of any particular graduate student becoming cannon fodder in Afghanistan or Iraq to help energize more resistance to our very unpopular and very unwise stance in the world right now. So there are other things the students focus on. Things that I think in the long run will bring great credit to them and will relieve some suffering in some places. So I applaud them for that. I suppose the old activist in me would still love to see some ramparts put up and some banners unfurled and some student noise around domestic political issues, but that doesn't seem to happen these days.
MIT's been faced with several sort of turning points in the research misconduct allegations in the 1990s, the undergrad, the antitrust suit right after that, and then the women in science.
Yep.
Do you believe MIT's kind of acted or had the moral authority? Could it have done more to do the right thing?
Oh, I think we could always do more, but I think we've done the right things on these, and I've been very pleased about this. Let me go back a little further. In the early 90s, the antitrust thing, which filed as an antitrust suit, was really and I saw it as an attack on a university's right to determine how it will best utilize its limited resources to support students, undergraduates in particular. And the background of that was the overlap, the meetings that used to be held among the Ivy League Plus group to make sure that when a student was given an offer for admission, she got essentially the same kind of offer from all the graduate schools, and could make the decision not on the grounds of money, but on the grounds of which place is best for her to go to, and which place will best offer her an opportunity to develop her intellectual interest and to make a contribution. And the attack on that has led to this subsequent reality in which we have bidding wars now for graduate students, and students are playing off one school against another for financial resources, and I think it's just unfortunate. I think we took the right stand. We took a principled stand on this back in the early 90s and said, wait a minute, government's wrong on this, and we're going to stand up and fight. It was a Pyrrhic victory. We won. We won the battle, but we lost the war because everyone else caved. But in principle, we won it, and I think that was the best of MIT. The other turning point for me was the Women in Science report, and I credit both the dean at the time, Bob Bergeneau, who was Dean of Science, and Chuck Vest, with the right response to the challenge, to not dismiss the women, but to say, yeah, the data is solid, we've got a problem, let's see what we can do about it. The Scott Kruger affair is a turning point. I think Chuck made the right decision, even though it was a painful one. I think the Institute is better off for it, to make some changes in how we house our students and the policies around housing. I think we've substantially corralled the issue of alcohol use on campus in a pretty good way. And I think we've seen that our students really don't drink as much as people think they do. Not nearly as much, but I don't know, nearly have as many problems, but that we've got resources in place to help students to use alcohol responsibly. And we've made some changes in the housing system that I think have been better, have made the whole enterprise better, in my view. Perhaps with one lurch here or there with having undergraduates and graduate housing for a while, that's something that hasn't worked. But on the whole, I think it's improved. Now we have a new challenge, and that's coming out of the James Shirley matter. And the challenge isn't so much around Professor Shirley as it is around the issue of how race impacts faculty, faculty tenure here, faculty sojourn here towards tenure, and how it affects employment at every level at MIT. There is an impact of race here, just as there is outside of MIT. And we have an opportunity to address this in a forthright manner, to address it deeply and with appropriate research and observations around people's experiences and what they imply about the organization, and to do it in a way that can hopefully allow MIT to get out in the forefront of change, as we did with the women. This challenge is at least as significant as the challenge with women, and perhaps more difficult because it involves deeply held emotions and points of view that have not made it easy for conversations about race to happen either at this institution or in this society. So I think we have a lot of work to do, but I'm optimistic that if any place can handle this and come up with a set of recommendations and practices that will bring some positive change, it should be MIT. I guess another challenge that we faced is a challenge of the physical infrastructure of this campus and how it gets renewed and rebuilt and pointed towards the future. It's just been an enormous amount of construction on this campus, and it just seems that something's being torn up or put up, torn down all the time. We certainly continue this practice of having unique buildings that don't bear any necessary relationship to one another. So it's a challenge to have what would appear to be a unified campus. We don't have a campus that's, sort of like the Gothic architecture of Yale or the beautiful architecture that's down at Brown, or the Georgian architecture at Johns Hopkins and stuff like that. We have all these one-ofs. And my personal view of it is that some of them are pretty awful. but they all certainly draw comments. So I think that's a big challenge to renew the plant. There's an enormous challenge with the Bosworth buildings here and their lack of energy efficiency and how to maintain them and still make them cost effective. There's continuing challenge on student housing here. We're going to have to do more, and doing more is an increasing expense because construction in this city is just amazingly costly.
Do you have a favorite place on campus? A place you like to retreat to or hide in?
Yeah, I'm not sure I want anybody to know. Yes, there are some favorite places on campus, yeah.
Do you have a favorite hack that you guys?
Oh, do I have a favorite? Yeah. My favorite hack, well, I have two favorite hacks. They're two. They're equally wonderful to me. My favorite is probably the police car that was on the dome with the donut, the bag of donuts on the seat. But probably equal to that was the Wright brothers airplane on the dome. I think both were enormous engineering feats. Nobody was hurt, nothing was damaged to do them. Just a quintessential hack. Now, historically, there was a third one that I heard about and wish I had actually seen, but I've heard others talk about it, and that was the building cozies that were designed to put a cozy over a building. I wish I'd seen that, and I wish I'd seen the one with the Model T with the old car hanging off of the Green Building. Those are wonderful, clever, thoughtful kinds of hacks that really speak to the breadth and depth of engineering expertise around here among our students. And I'm not sure I'd want any of them deciding they want to come into my house to do something, because no alarm system in the world could keep them out, right?
I guess I want to get into maybe a little bit the last couple of minutes here about, there's several, different trends going on. There seems to be a collection of identity crises, that the old big engineering and science, physical sciences are seeing declines. We've seen the rise of new programs. We've got the humanities and social sciences are sometimes seem to be on the outside of MIT, sort of. Or they've always had this crisis identity.
Yeah. Well, I think there's clearly evolution in the sciences, in engineering and humanities. By the way, I think the humanities are less outside than they've ever been. Given the number of students who come here with incredible art, music, and related talents. But the evolution seems to be in the direction of intense interdisciplinarity. That the questions that are most important today and that are galvanizing the most interest and the most research dollars sit between the fields and require the collective efforts of people from many, many different fields. I think that's really exciting, and I think it's natural that as questions evolve, the fields have to evolve with them. Certainly it gives some angst to the, quote, old guard who are more comfortable with their relative silos of activities, which won't go away entirely. I mean, there'll always be some interest, for example, in physical chemistry as physical chemistry, and in some areas of biology is relatively pure, but the big questions now require a lot more collaboration across those boundaries, and that's wonderful. It brings in ideas and energy from sometimes quite unexpected places. So one of the things I'll be looking for in the years to come is that bridge that's supposed to be going from the Stata building to the brain sciences, the brain cognitive sciences complex. Which would be another symbol to me of all of these areas coming together. You have the electrical engineers, and you have the linguists, and you have the brain scientists, and the cognitive science, the wet lab science, brain sciences, the cognitive scientists, and the imaging people working on what this massive gray matter up here really does. I think it's really exciting. I think the developments of biotech industry around us are very exciting and new, and in time will be supplanted by something else. We were surrounded by high tech in the 70s and 80s, and now it's biotech, and who knows what it will be 50 years from now, but it'll be exciting. And it really shows, to me, it's direct evidence of MIT being able to evolve very quickly to take advantage of these trends.
How have changing sources of funding changed the work that you do? The diminishment of government, foundation, corporate, venture capital?
Makes it more challenging, that's for sure. I think this historical relationship between the federal government and universities, I think that's to the detriment of basic research, generally speaking, because there are few other stable sources of funding to guarantee basic research in the government. Yes, we've certainly have tried to fill in the gaps with funding from foundations and certainly rich support from corporations, but those are much more limited in scope and limited in terms of what their expectations of outcomes are than the kind of open checkbook we used to have from the feds. We'll survive. We'll certainly survive, and we'll do some wonderful things, but I'm hoping the day will come once again when these wars are over and we turn attention to more and more edifying pursuits, that the government will once again see the value of long-term support, deep, rich support for public education and for research and for basic research. Because out of those two wells have flown the waters that we're using down, we're sipping and using down now. And I don't see us replenishing those wells. Particularly a lot, and for me, the real tragedy in this nation will be the continued disinvestment in public education. We just seem to have forgotten the lesson of the 50s and the 60s, where we turned our attention to educating cadres of scientists and engineers to meet a challenge, and look at what we went to the moon. And out of that came all kinds of stuff that have put us at the forefront of technology in the world. But we're slipping, we're losing it. The Chinese are coming on strong. Everybody else is gearing up to take us over. And we're sitting around, talking about charter schools and all kinds of foolishness, that we really should be once again dedicating ourselves to making sure we have an educated populace in all areas, not just science and engineering, but all areas.
I guess we'll start wrapping up here. I want to get some time for you to reflect back a little bit. When I was at your retirement party, I was walking around the audience, and the one thing that people mentioned really more than anything is that if it wasn't for I, so many people wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have stayed, or she wouldn't have stayed, or he wouldn't have stayed. What do they see in you? What did you offer? What did you do?
Well, some of it is just, it's an interesting. I think one of the things that I've tried to do is to provide a place where people can come and talk about what's bothering them, and try to give them some good advice about how they can deal with the problem. Secondly, being in that chair, it is possible to open some doors by seeding some funding, something, by having a conversation with the department about a student's promise, by creating programs that give people an opportunity to show that they can compete effectively at a place like MIT, and by using my bully pulpit outside of the institution to demystify some of what MIT is. So that a broad range of people with talents, ideas, vision, and energy can come here and contribute to the development of knowledge, and do so at a level that they might not even have been aware that they were able to. I've always had a faith in the ability of people to rise to a challenge when they're supported, and feel that there's someone there to mentor, to support, sometimes just to be a good listener, and to help them to see what it is they need to do. And if people see that as opening doors, yeah, I've been happy to do that. I didn't get where I am by myself. I stood on other shoulders. Some pushed me through doors. Some dragged me through windows. Others encouraged me, and others got out of the way so that I could make some contributions. And I think I can do no less for others while I'm in that chair. That's sort of been a mission in life. I didn't get where I am by myself, and it's my responsibility to help others to get where they need to go. And it doesn't matter who they are. Doesn't matter whether it's a person of color, whether it's a white student, whether it's an international student, a woman, whatever. If I'm in a position to try to help somebody in some way, it's my obligation to do it. And the other thing that's been my obligation to do is to bring people to the table. Now, I say this in a somewhat humorous way, but underneath it is a real conviction here that, you know, we're always telling graduate students about how brilliant they are and how accomplished the people are who come here. And now we have an institution that has all kinds of issues and problems in administration. So, all right, if I think you're so bright, I'm going to put you down at the table and put you to work. Let's see what you come up with. And in fact, by bringing students to the table in a meaningful way, we've just had some wonderful solutions and some great thinking and some wonderful legwork done on a host of problems that I think would have been much more difficult to resolve without having more minds, more good minds at the table. And to me, it ain't rocket science. You know, many good minds are better than one, usually.
If you look at your time as dean of graduate students or your involvement as associate dean or senior associate, can you think of alternatively very tough decisions you had to make or events or decisions that were particularly affirming?
Yeah, I've had to make some tough decisions about who stays and who goes. I had to make some tough decisions around students who had some problems that they just couldn't cope with. That's always it's always tough because people come here to get their degrees and then be able to go off and contribute to society, and sometimes it simply doesn't work, and sometimes it's out of the student's control. That's been tough. The affirming thing, yeah, one of the particularly affirming things that I'm very happy about having been in the chair to help put into place was a new policy around childbearing for women graduate students. This started actually with one of our married students in Eastgate, who came with some thoughts about how we might change the rules to make childbearing more affirming to our graduate women than it was. I mean, it used to be treated as an adverse medical condition, and the way we set up the rules, if you have one, you get cut off. Literally, you get cut off. So you're having a baby, hey, you got to get out. You can't live in institutional housing. And by the way, you're losing your RA, and you can't get any money through MIT. Now, that's not terribly affirming. So MIT, with our efforts, was the first university in the country to come up with to develop and implement a institute-wide policy that we call a childbirth accommodation policy that permits a woman graduate student to have her child and bond with her child and not be adversely impacted in her graduate career. Very proud of that because it was the right signal to give to a growing group, a growing cadre of graduate students who are coming to the institution. A number of women are growing. The number of women is growing here. So that was particularly affirming. I'm really pleased about that, and pleased that we were first out with a policy that was institute-wide, and others around the country now are doing their own versions of that. Some going further than we have. Some including the men. Others doing longer periods or deeper and richer financial support, but nonetheless following the example. So I'm very pleased about that.
You saw yourself 10, 25 more years ago. Based on all your experience since then, and seeing what what's coming down the road, what advice would you give?
Run in the other direction. I never in my wildest dreams ever imagined that I would be a dean. Ever imagined that I could be or wanted to be. In fact, in graduate, I gave the dean such a hard time in graduate school that this is perhaps a turnabout. I never imagined this. What it says to me is that one has to be open to possibilities in life. You have to be a fast learner, be willing to take calculated risks, be open to many possibilities and be able to see quickly whether in fact you might be able to make a contribution there and be willing to try it. And you have to be a bridge builder. Because none of what I've been credited with was done alone. I mean, there are just scores of people who were on the bus. And the issue is, who can you get on the bus? Because it is who's on the bus that counts. It's the name of a book, but that really speaks to me. So it has been an amazing journey for me here, with twists and turns along the way, none of which I could have anticipated, but each one of which offered some possibility to learn something entirely new, to stretch my capabilities in some other direction, to contribute something that I thought might be of importance to the institution, and to make a difference.
What do you want future generations to remember about you, or the office, or your time here, or maybe what do popular accounts or the kind of current mythology or history around you get wrong? Correct anything for the record. Correct
anything for the record. I'm not sure what they're all thinking out there, but I think they're going to pretty much get it right, that I brought graduate students to the table in a meaningful way around decisions and issues that affect their experience here, that I changed the direction of the institution around the issue of graduate students and community, that I helped create and maintain an office that's very student friendly, and that I built collaborations across a wide variety of administrative functions here that didn't necessarily see themselves as having a role in graduate education or graduate life. And that was all to the purpose of making the graduate experience here a really good one for the majority of our students. That's what I want people to remember. Most of graduate students haven't eaten at my table, so they don't know how I can cook. But
what are you going to be doing next? What are you going to be doing?
Well, I'm going to take some time to try to change my pace and pressure for a while. I want to reflect a little bit more on the past 30 years here. But I'm also involved in 2 startups now and 3 more that are along the way. So I have picked up along the way at MIT this work ethic that's unrelenting. And I know that I won't be able to sit still for very long. I have wanted to try my hand in entrepreneurial matters just to see what happens, to see what kind of fun I can have there. And so I will be doing a number of entrepreneurial activities, some of which are not for profit and some of which are for profit. But I will be having some fun with people who I really like. And we'll see what the next 30 years bring me.
And you and your partner, do you have any plans about where you want to travel or do or anything?
We always do. I learned a long time ago. This is something that the passing of a number of really close friends early on changed for me. There are 3 people, 2 of whom I mentioned earlier in this interview, Constantine Semenides and Jim Cullerton, both of whom died early as far as I'm concerned, and then Vera Ballard, who used to work over in HST, very good friend. She was an undergraduate at Brown when I was a graduate student there. One of those people, they all died young, and reinforced for me that tomorrow is never guaranteed. So all of that vacation time that I never took, all of those excuses that I had for not taking much of my time, all of that stopped. Jim was the last person to pass away 11 years ago. And it was then that I decided I need to make sure that I do some of the things, that Tom and I see some of the world that we wanted to see, wow, we can do it. And so every year there's a major trip somewhere, at least one major trip somewhere. And so I've been pretty much around the world because of that, and that will continue. And it's turned out to be the right thing to do, because in some of these places you can't be 70 years old for climbing up and down, steep pathways, etc. There are places that it's good to be lithe to go to, and that will continue. That definitely will continue. The cooking will continue because I find that just very relaxing and affirming. And besides which, I can beat the hell out of a piece of steak and it doesn't talk back. That will continue. The collecting of art will continue because that's a lifelong, to me, deeply intellectual pursuit to have a piece of artwork that speaks to me and that I can enjoy every day and add to a collection at home that I can look at and say, each one of these has a story for me, and each one of them has a story for us, and is somehow connected to our lives in a meaningful way. That will continue. But the other piece of it will be some challenge that gets me up every day, that keeps me learning something new on a regular basis, and that basically keeps me young. I've learned here particularly at MIT over 30 years, that lifelong learning is important, and that having a challenge before you to grow in some way, to learn something entirely new, to push boundaries, it's absolutely important to being willing to get up in the morning and go forward with life. So these are the things that will occupy the next 30 years.
How did you and Tom meet? Was it a shared interest, a shared passion?
How do we meet?
Yeah.
No, we met in a bar. It was shared drinking, that's what it was. No, we actually had a very funny meeting, and in the most unusual place, actually. I'd actually gone out just to watch people dancing, and I met the love of my life that night. I wasn't interested in meeting anybody. Sometimes things happen many times when you least expect them. I wasn't interested in meeting anybody. I was just bored, and I liked to watch people dance. So I just went out, and I just met this guy, and we hit it off. And in many ways, we're so very different. He's younger than me, and I used to not like people younger than me. He's a similar A-type personality, and I usually didn't gravitate to A-type personalities. But we found that we had many similar likes. We both like art. We both love to travel. We both have a similar sense of humor. We both I like to cook. He's as good a cook as I am, so it makes for a lot of fun. We both love a beautiful garden, beautiful places, and we just found that we were compatible in ways that I didn't expect from somebody younger than me. And, it's worked. We've been together 27 years now, more than 27, heading into the future together. And we'll be together the rest of our lives, I know. And that's, I'm very happy about that too. And our families are happy for us, which is very nice. Doesn't always happen either. And we've got some really good friends from MIT, friends from out of here, friends all over the world. It's another good reason to travel too. And so it's we're fortunate in that regard, that so many aspects of our lives have come together in such a positive way, and that's great. That's great.
I guess just final two questions, or maybe they'll tie together. So MIT's 150th is an occasion as much to look backwards as it is to look forwards. And so maybe the half of looking backwards, what about MIT is different? Why haven't other universities been able to imitate MIT's success?
That's a very good question. I think it has much to do with the people who have been through this, the remarkable people who have been through and who have given real substance to this place. It has much to do with the style of MIT, which has encouraged innovation, a level of entrepreneurship that's unlike any other place I've ever seen, a celebration and recognition of effectiveness and competence that's not matched by many other places. And a spirit of collaboration that just makes this place kind of unique. And of course there's some sheer genius here too. I'm not in that camp, but I've met some of the most incredibly brilliant people I've ever met in my life here. One of them having been Jerry Wiesner, as a matter of fact. that, and some of our Nobel laureates, just brilliant people who managed to draw others around them into enterprises that build upon their collective strengths. Yeah, it's hard to say what makes MIT MIT, but it fundamentally has to be the people. It's not the buildings. It's not the research infrastructure. It's who's here.
So what's MIT's trajectory? What's it evolving into? Where's it headed? Would you change where it's headed?
I don't think we can. It's headed where it's headed. And I think we're going to make some incredible inroads into the central nervous system. I think we're going to have some amazing impact on medicine through the genome, through the genomic work, and unraveling what all that stuff really does. Now I found that the junk genes really do mean something, and we're going to figure out how they regulate everything else. I think MIT will go a long ways, and that will have a tremendous impact on health sciences and on biological, on life, on the quality of life for every human being on this planet. I think that's going to happen. I think we will continue to do some marvelous, incredible things in the arts. Something that MIT still isn't as well known for, even though the arts pervade the institution. They're so fundamental to what everybody else does here that it's part of the backdrop, and most people outside don't understand that. But I think we do some wonderful things in the arts here, and we'll continue to bring art, engineering, and science together in unique ways to create some new forms. And I think that'll be very exciting for the future. I would like to see MIT become a much more truly diverse place. I think we have some challenges in that regard, particularly on with respect to the faculty and the administrative staff here. I think it can happen, but much of that will depend on the quality of the discussion that has to follow this investigation of race and ethnicity on this campus. And if we achieve all those things, and if we really make some headway on them, MIT will continue to be one of the world's greatest institutions, a place that sets the standard that others aspire to. And I really do think the institution can do it. I've seen MIT and been a part of MIT doing some things that I would never have expected, including my appointment as dean, that I would never have had reason to expect. And it's the willingness of the institution to take these bold moves, take these bold positions, and think out of the box, as we say so often around here, and act out of the box that will keep us ahead. And I look forward to looking. I look forward to looking back. So I've just been grateful to have been a part of this amazing institution and have contributed to the enterprise in some small way. It's been wonderful for me, and I hope it says to other folks out there like me that it's possible.
Is there anything else you want to add before we finish up? Last.
I got 1,000 stories. I'm not sure I want to put them on record. I think I'll let others tell some of the stories.
All right. One interview now. It's just after noon.
Oh my gosh, is it really? Wow.